My name is Elizabeth MacAdam. They call me Beth. And I was born Elizabeth Jean Spence in Broadview, Saskatchewan on October the 13th, 1915. My parents were born in Scotland, October the 19th, 1940. Russell Gerald MacAdam. We met at a party in Winnipeg. Of airmen having a farewell party for those that were being transferred to other places. That's where I met him. How we met, because there was a banker that there was a bank boy that was in the bank here at that time, or a little before, and his name was Sir Lastly. And I used to go with him in Winnipeg, so he was moved to Schreiber, Ontario, and that's how I became familiar with the name Schreiber. So talking to Russell, we got very talkative, and that's what happened. To Sharon and Ian, two grandchildren, Richie and Susan, and three great-grandchildren, Maud and Ailish and Lily. I volunteered most of my life, but I did start out long ago as housework in Winnipeg, and then I was in the card company. I volunteered in several organizations and the church. It was a church. From the time I came to Schreiber, the original time, I was just in Schreiber a few days when Dorothy MacPhail, who was a big church worker, invited me to be in a play. So I was in a play at the church with Alec Gordon and Pont Gordon. Well, I remember the first day I arrived in Schreiber was November the 11th, 1940. And it was raining, and I was met by my mother-in-law at the station, and she said, "We're going out for tea this afternoon to Mary Coon's." And that was a habit among the women in Schreiber in those days, because they all met here and there and knit socks for the soldiers. We went around with Mrs. Hellers and Mrs. Ross's and Mrs. Wilson's and Mrs. Hepburn's, and it was great. I got to know them all. Yes, I belonged to the Women's Institute, and Christmas time we made up hampers and delivered them to different people, which was interesting too. I got to know more people that way also. One thing we used to, it was really a boys' game, but I played it, and it was playing knife. We sat on the ground and put the point of our knife on our finger and put it like that to make it stick in the ground. We did that a lot. And then we had a great time on stilts. We made different stilts and walked on them, and that was fun. The rest was work, because I brought up on a farm. I learned to swim in the river at home. The river ran just at the corner of our property, so it was very nice. And a girl friend came out from Winnipeg, and the two of us decided to learn to swim. So where the river came around, it was deeper there. So we stood there and we swam out. That's where we learned to swim. I believe most everything has changed. And now I don't know just where to begin, but whatever you wanted to do, it seemed so simple in those days, and now anything you have to do seems to be an effort. Traveling, we did a lot of traveling, because my mother lived on the West Coast, and my daughter lived on the East Coast, so we traveled between places. Most of the time we drove, but then laterly we flew. We traveled a lot by train too, especially during the war. We traveled a lot by train. Well, I used to. I had knitting and sewing and reading. Well, the Legion, I joined it. It was formed just after the war, so I joined it. I've been a member of it for 67 years this year. And I was in the Rebecca's and the Eastern Star, and earlier than that was the Women's Institute, and of course the church. I was always busy there. Oh yes, there's a lot of people went into the war. Well, you look at the cenotaph and you'll see how many in the First World War and how many were in the Second World War, how many came back, and quite a few didn't come back. And that was a hard time during the war days. During the war, I was out in Neepawa, Manitoba. That's where my husband was in the Air Force, and he went overseas and was taken off flying because he fainted or something, and so they wouldn't let him fly anymore. And they had him in hospital for quite a while and took him back to Canada. And then he trained in Canada and he got his wings and everything, but whatever happened, anyway, he was taken up. But when he came back here, he was training men, and usually they were from England, and so he trained pilots. He did have to ration in the early days of especially sugar and butter, and those two things especially. But when we lived in Neepawa, we could trade our oh, forget what we called it, tickets we got. There were little tickets that you got to get sugar and that. So we used to trade off with farmers, because the farmers' wives used so much for preserves and stuff, and they would have more than they needed, so we would trade stamps with them. It was quite a thing, and I remember we'd meet in the store to get lard, and I know I just took a header in one of the one of the boxes one day. They would just bring in a box of lard and put it on the floor, and everybody there had it, so we'd go, and I was bent over getting it, and another person came along and was hurrying to get one too, and she pushed me and I went in the box with it. So, and that was a big laugh, of course. But yes, there was a lot of food on. I'm glad you brought that up. I could never think of it anymore. Well, you know, it was very interesting, and of course, it just came so natural to us that we just handled it as it came, you know. But wartime was a very busy time and a very interesting time. You'd meet up with so many different people from different places. We got sent to one place, Russwood, and then we were at Gimli in Manitoba for a while, and Neepawa and Gimli were the biggest places we were at. And you meet all those people too from different countries. There was a lot of Icelanders at Gimli. That's an Icelandic town anyway, and they were very interesting. And you learned the different foods. I remember at Christmas time, go in the butcher shop, and there was, as the place was Icelandic, you got so much Icelandic food, and it was so good. It was all interesting, you know.